So we're going to war against England in order to get land. Now that President Madison didn't talk much about that. He didn't make a big deal of that. He doesn't want to make a big issue. He doesn't want to make it look like we're out just to take territory away from England. So that didn't get a lot of attention in his speech, but it's there, and it's been discussed a lot in Congress, and we know all about it. But there's another issue related to land. It's land in the areas around what it would be like today, western Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, those areas out there in the Northwest Territory that have been U.S. territory since 1783. And remember, we set up the Northwest Ordinance in 1787 to establish the Northwest Territory as a government for that territory. So that's been ours, and it's been there for a long time. But as of 1811, 1812, we're having a real problem settling that territory. It's ours, but we can't settle it. And the reason is very obvious. The reason is that the Indians are objecting to our taking it. It's kind of complicated. In 1794, we had signed a treaty with a number of Indians. This is called the Treaty of Greenville. It was signed in Greenville, Indiana in 1794. And we drew a line down the continent through Greenville, Indiana, which is about the middle of Indiana. And we said that everything to the east of that would be open to U.S. settlement. So that would include all of Ohio and the eastern part of Indiana. But the area to the west of it, which would be western Indiana and all of Illinois, and then the parts down into Kentucky and so forth, that follow that line, that would be a settlement where we would take half, but the other half would be reserved for the Indians. And we signed that treaty in 1794. Well, now here it is 1810 or so, and now we want that territory that the Indians have. So we are starting to settle into there in violation of the treaty. We're moving into Indian territory, even though under a treaty we have agreed that that's going to be reserved for the Indians. All right. Well, you know, we've been dealing with Indians for a long time, and we have an established policy for dealing with Indians. We go out and we tell them, oh, we want this land, you've got to leave. And if Indians don't want to go along with that, well, then we have the army come out and we force them out. I mean, we had been fighting against the Indians in 1794. That was, when we first started taking some of that territory, we started to force the Indians out. And then we decided just to settle it at the line of Greenville. And now we want more, so we just go on to the next step and say, okay, now we want this, and move out. But this time the Indians are really saying, no, we're not going. There's an Indian leader, as of 1810, around there, whose name is Tecumseh. He was himself a Shawnee, and the Shawnee were noted as extremely capable soldiers. They were very militaristic, and he is the head of the Shawnee tribe. Many other Indians didn't really trust him because they kind of were suspicious of Shawnees. But Tecumseh is moving to convince them that we have to draw the line here. We have to stop constantly letting the white people come in, tell us we have to move, and then just moving. We've got a treaty with them. Let's hold them to that. Let's not go any further. And what he says is we have to be unified. You know, one of the things that he knew, he was English speaking. He was married to a white woman. He knew about the history of Indians. He knew a lot of stuff. He was very well read. He was a very bright guy. And he knew that historically, one of the things that white people had done was a sort of a divide and conquer strategy. I mean, you know, you get you encounter the Indians in the what is called the Iroquois Confederation, and France has got allies with them, and then England comes along and makes alliances with a couple of the tribes, with the Mohawk and the Cayuga, or with the Onondaga or whatever, and so then you get your allies to fight against the French allies, and so then they have this big war during the 7 Years' War. The Indians are fighting. Some members of the Iroquois Confederation are fighting other members. And so they have this big war against each other, and who wins? England! Because they kill each other off, they defeat each other, and then the English come in and take it over. And that was still going on a little bit when the Revolutionary was on. And so then, as a result of the Revolution, the Americans take over. They take over from England, and because England hadn't settled it much, now we're going to start settling it, and now we're going to start moving the Indians out. And Tecumseh says, we have to stand together. We have to be united. We have to, instead of fighting against each other, we have to join together in a confederation that will resist white takeover. We can't let the white people keep pushing around like this. And he was joined by his brother, Tenskwatawa. I don't think I'll need to write that word. I'm sure you can figure out how that's spelled. He was a religious leader, and he convinced a lot of people that we had to join together. They had to kind of overcome the hostility to them as Shawnees, but slowly but surely they're doing that. Slowly but surely they're convincing Indians they all have to stand together. And for the first time in a long time, Indians are providing effective resistance. They are killing settlers who cross over the line into Indian territory. Some people were moving out there. The U.S. Army established a fort. It's called Fort Dearborn at the bottom end of Lake Michigan, near what is now Chicago. And the Indians come out and demolish the fort and kill all the soldiers. So they're resisting us. Many congressmen start talking about this, and they insist that this is all a result of the English agitating and assisting the Indians. They insisted that the Tecumseh movement, the Tecumseh Confederation, which is not complete, he hasn't gotten everybody to sort of sign on, but he's getting a lot of people to kind of go along with him in this. He's getting a lot of tribes out there to support him as a leader, and to offer joint resistance to continued American incursion into their land. And we blamed the English for it. We said that somehow the whole Tecumseh movement is an English plot. You know, a lot of times the Americans, we don't like to admit that other people don't like us because of what we do. We want to blame, we want to blame the communists, or blame Cuba, or blame whoever. Back then we wanted to blame the Indians. It's what we do, but we don't like to admit it. We don't ever want to admit that we do anything wrong. If there's somebody who opposes us, it's because there's somebody else behind them, somebody else agitating them. Because how could anybody dislike us because we're perfect? There are a number of members of Congress who'd been elected in 1810 from western states. These people were called the War Hawks in Congress, because they are demanding war with England, both to acquire the territory, to acquire Canada, and to have a military incursion against England to stop the Indian problems that we're having with Tecumseh. And there's a lot of support for that. That's a big issue. There's all kinds of congressional support for war against England from these war hawks, who are all Republicans, because the the Whig Party is, I mean, excuse me, the Federalist Party is almost gone, especially in the West. These are Westerners. They're sort of a new breed of Republican, and they want war against England to acquire Canada and to suppress Tecumseh. And I would suggest to you that those two issues, the issue of Canada and Tecumseh, are more important than the issues of impressment and neutral rights. But between them, Congress voted a declaration of war. And I would think, maybe you kind of think this through, you know, it's kind of weird. Here, England and France are engaged in a war. France did not accept our terms. They didn't. They tricked us. They let us think that they had, but they had not. But the ironic thing is, a few days after we declared war, we got the word from England that England had indeed repealed the Orders in Council. So, in fact, of the reasons that we cited for war, one of the big ones is neutral rights, and officially that's gone away. Now, impressment was still there, but I would suggest that what's really there and what really matters is not all this talk about neutral rights, because that's a non-issue. England has repealed the Orders in Council, and it's kind of funny, you could say we sort of went to war against the wrong country. France did not repeal their measures, England did, but we went to war against England. But it's because we got tricked by Napoleon, and because even though that issue had gone away, there were other issues that were still there. Yes, impressment was still there, but it's also these Western issues. It's the war hawks and their demand for war. And, you know, even when England repealed the Orders in Council, we didn't stop the war. You know, we could have said, okay, let's reconsider here. But no, we still want that land, and we're still after the Indians. We're still trying to break the Tecumseh conspiracy. So the war went on. It was a very unpopular war. One of the reasons why President Madison did not mention these Western issues was because many Northeastern congressmen had been arguing against the Westerners, who are all pro-war, the war hawks. Wait a minute, you guys want to go to war to get that land in the West and to get rid of the Indians off of your problem, so you can expand further out into Indian territory. You can take that over and keep expanding and growing, and you can just take all that land and everything. But we're the ones who are going to have to fight the war. And we're the ones who live on the coast. If there's a war, as you want, you're not going to have your cities shelled by the English Navy. We are. You're not having your families put at risk. We are. And what Madison is trying to do with his address is to minimize those Western issues. He mentioned them, but just tried to keep them. He just mentioned them very much in passing. And you kind of have to read between the lines to figure out what he's talking about when he talked about why England had done this. Oh, he's talking about the allegation that they're supporting Tecumseh. You can't figure it out. He doesn't want to talk about that because he doesn't want the war to look like it's what Easterners charge, a war to gain land at their expense, at the expense of the Easterners who are going to have to bear the burden of having the war carried to their homes and to their towns and cities. So the war is on, but people in the Northeast, especially New England, continue to oppose it very strongly. There's a lot of opposition to the war there, and some of it is political. The Federalists are sort of leading the opposition, but as I said, the Federalist Party has sort of been dying out. It's gotten a new lease on life because of the unpopularity of the war, especially in New England. The Westerners are all in favor of it. Southerners are largely in favor of it. They want to go get more land too so that they can expand slavery. They want to take Florida, that's down in the south. Um, but in the New England area, the war is immensely unpopular. The country's very divided over the war, very divided. Madison had tried to appeal to the Northeast by saying, look, it's your families that are affected by this trade. It's your ships that are out there at sea being seized by the English and the French navies. It's your family members who are sailors who are being impressed and so forth. And he was trying to appeal for support there. Didn't go over very well. New Englanders remained very hostile to the war, and were very unhappy about it. Frankly, the war did not go well for the United States. We had deluded ourselves into thinking that we could invade Canada and that the Canadian people would be anxious to join us. You know, they want to be part of the United States. They want American freedom for themselves. And so we thought that by going to Canada, we would get the local militias to join us and support us and get the British Army out. But we overlooked the reality. Most of the people of Canada, the English people, the English speakers, there were a lot of French speakers who were just sort of not interested in this at all. But of the English speakers, most of them were people who had come to Canada during the Revolutionary War because they were loyalists. They had been as loyalists, as Tories, as opponents of independence. They had been driven out of the United States. In many cases, their land had been confiscated. They'd been forced out physically. And then some of them had just fled for their lives and so forth. People, the Tories, many Tories, the loyalists had left the United States during the war. Some of them had gone down to the West Indies, some had gone back to England itself, but the great majority of them had gone to Canada, where they acquired some land and started to try to take up their lives over. The reason that they're in Canada is because they don't want to be in the United States. They had rejected American independence, and they don't want to have anything to do with us. So we thought they would rise and join us. No, they fought strenuously against us, and our efforts to invade Canada were pretty well failures. Now, there was one time when we were fighting up there, and we were in a battle against the English, and Tecumseh had fled the United States and had gone to the English army to ask for protection because he knew we were out to get him, and we did kill Tecumseh in a battle there. But most of our battles in Canada to liberate it were failures because the Canadians didn't want to be liberated. We had problems financing the war. Now, you know, this is sort of ironic. One of the reasons why Hamilton wanted the Bank of the United States was so that if we ever got into another war, we could borrow all the money we needed from the bank. And that was one of the reasons to have the bank. And the bank had been chartered in 1791 for 20 years, so this charter expired just before the war started. So here, now we need the bank, for the since it's the first time that we've had a war since the bank was established, and ironically, the bank is gone. So we had trouble financing the war. We've got a lot of problems with the war, and I have to take a few minutes to finish those up, which I will do in next week's lectures.